So let's get started. What happens after 40? We've broken this down into three main parts, and we're going to cover your metabolism and hormones, then the effect on body composition and weight, and finally, we'll cover sleep and energy. Because really, who doesn't want more of that? All right, so let's go with metabolism and hormones. You can see that there's two graphs right here. The top one is for females, and the lower one is for males. We're going to start with the orange line, which is the growth hormone and IGF 1. Growth hormone and IGF 1 are anabolic hormones, and that means they build things. So, growth hormone builds muscles and bones and it burns fat. So, we like it. And you can see this yellow line here over the lifespan. So, going from left to right, you can see the level of growth hormone changes. And in both men and women, it increases until our late teens, and then it starts to drop kind of rapidly, as you can see. Next is the estrogen and progesterone, which is the blue line. You can see how it kind of gets a little wild in women, and you can also see that it changes in men too. And then, of course, we have to talk about testosterone and DHEA, which for males, you can see climbs up pretty dramatically at puberty. That's that red line. And then it begins to drop in their 30s and 40s. It's less dramatic for females. And these sex hormones affect our muscles, bones, and fat. In fact, as these hormones drop, it becomes easier to lose muscle and bone and to gain fat. And that extra fat tissue usually ends up around our waistline. Now, these hormone changes are natural and they will happen, right? This is just the way we're designed. Some people will seek out hormone therapy to counter these changes, and we're not going to talk about that today. But we do have two other hormones that we have to talk about because we're talking about fat burning today, and they are insulin and cortisol. So, insulin is a hormone that is a storage hormone, and we're going to talk about it in a second. And cortisol is a stress hormone that prepares your body to face stressful events so that you can face that lion. And those are the two that you can manipulate with lifestyle behaviors, which is what we like to do here at Zero. We like to get in control of what the signaling pattern is in the body. So, anytime we talk about fat burning, we have to talk about insulin. As we age, insulin sensitivity changes, and therefore, so does fat burning. So, here's a quick review of insulin and fat burning. You can recall that the body needs fuel to burn to have energy for life. We can burn glucose, glycogen, or fat. Now, let's use this candle. This makes it easy to remember. Notice that fat is on the bottom and it's the largest fuel source in the body. And the challenge is that the body burns the candle from the top down. You can see glucose and glycogen are at the top. So you have to burn through those to get to burning fat. Now, what determines whether you're burning down the candle or building it up? Insulin. When you eat, your blood glucose or blood sugar goes up. Too much glucose is poisonous to the body, so your body has to burn it or store it. So your body's defense is really to release insulin, which does two things. It turns off the fat burning, basically it snuffs out that flame, and it starts building up the candle again by storing all the extra sugars as glycogen and fat. So if your insulin goes up, you're going to actually be building up the candle. And if you continue to make the insulin go up or it naturally is staying elevated for too long or too often, you're going to develop insulin resistance, which means that your body doesn't respond appropriately to insulin anymore. It's kind of ignoring it. You basically get stuck in a state where you keep storing fat and you have difficulty getting into fat burning. And guess what? As we get older, our environment and hormones set us up so that it's easier to become more insulin resistant over time. That means it gets easier and easier to gain weight as fat, and it gets harder to burn that fat weight. So now, if that wasn't enough of a challenge, let's throw in cortisol, which is a stress hormone. If you have high stress without any breaks, your body is going to mobilize resources like amino acids from your muscles, fats, and sugars. So, with high cortisol, you basically melt down your muscles, your fat, your glycogen stores, everything, and you end up with higher blood sugars, fatty acids that are like triglycerides, and amino acids in the blood. Again, if you're over 40, any of these resources that you don't use immediately, you will store as fat. And because of the hormone setup, it settles around the belly. And so we might say that stress weight, when people tell me about gaining weight from stress, it usually ends up around the waistline because it's this high cortisol level. So, what can you do? Well, you want to manage your insulin sensitivity. This is super important because otherwise you're just going to be building up and up and up, and it gets to be a little bit challenging. So, after 40, you're going to want to pay attention to how you manage your insulin. And here's how you can do it. The key is you have to get the insulin low enough so that your fat burning is turned on. Secondly, you have to think about your fasting. If you fast for 12 to 18 hours, you're going to get that insulin lower. And so you turn on fat burning. Your diet and your exercise also make a big difference. If you are eating things that build up that candle and that cause your insulin to go high, it's going to make it harder to get back down to burning fat because you have to burn through all that. Exercise is another way to accelerate that burn and get it down so that you're burning off some of this extra fuel. The third thing you can do, which is the most valuable piece of information, is you can reduce the time to fat burn. So, your baseline nutrition, as long as you're not building up this candle too much, you're already going to be burning it down. Fast starters, that means the foods you eat before you start your fast, that last food you eat is going to determine how quickly you get into fat burning. Your carb quantity, and we're really talking about like processed carbs and starchy carbs. And then your meal size. If you eat a larger portion, you might have more glucose to burn off before you get down towards burning fat. And then the special trick is fasted exercise. So, again, exercise helps burn through these fuels. But if you exercise while you're fasted, you're already closer to burning fat, or you might actually already be burning fat. So, you get a double bonus. So now that we've talked about metabolism and hormones, let's get to that physical stuff. So we're going to be talking about body composition and weight. So I have to turn this over to our expert, Dr. Rich.
Thank you so much, Dr. P. All right. Yeah, this is all kind of synergistic again, and you can kind of see that based on the diagram that we've provided, or at least that we're in the works. We'll be building onto that as we go through our content today. With body comp and with body weight, a lot of people notice after 40 that there's less favorable changes. There's a kind of natural increase in body weight that seems to occur or that people may struggle with. And you also have a change in the distribution of that body weight where you have a reduction in lean mass. And this is a natural decline that we want to help with zero, get you to focus on your health, your skeletal muscle health, which is very closely linked with your bone health. So especially after age 40, taking advantage of cultivating muscle health will help you to support not only your ability to burn fat and your metabolic flexibility, it will also help you to support some of your bone health. And that is super important. And it's not just for women, it's also for males. It's really incredibly valuable to use the muscles and load the bones throughout, especially your middle and late adulthood. So let's take a look at what happens. As we get past age 40, there are some changes that take place. Some of them are, again, maybe not the best news, but there's things that you can do to combat all of these things. So you have a reduction in lean mass. That muscle and that bone will begin to kind of gradually decrease over time. And there are even some changes in your muscle nerve connection. So the nerves that come from your brain and your spinal cord that actually innervate the muscles, you can think of them as little electrical cords or electrical wires that actually touch the muscles and will activate them, you will begin to start losing connection, or you'll have spotty connection between them. So you have a harder time activating muscles for exercise, and even some daily tasks. So you find that maybe your balance falls off a little bit over time. You may find, again, there's headwinds in terms of aches, pains, or joint discomfort. I know there was a couple people in the chat earlier on said, "Hey, I'm not quite 40 yet. Is it okay that I'm here?" Hands up, I'm not 40 yet, and I'm here. And I'm noticing that I have joint pain, and I don't recover quite as well as I remember back when I was 18 and 20. So it's never too early, and it's never too late to start addressing some of these things. Um, and all that headwind, you've kind of got these changes going on in your body after 40 in particular. Um, in fact, your muscle mass between ages 20 to age 80, you will have a 40% reduction according to the research, which is a dramatic reduction in your muscle mass. And there's even larger reductions that occur in your muscle strength, which we'll talk about as well. So in order to battle that headwind, Zero is a great app that we're encouraging you to become active to support your muscle health. And that is a perfect synergy. It kind of clicks right in with fasting. I know Dr. P mentioned that fasted exercise is a great way to help you burn fat. Um, and that's absolutely true. But in order to get the most possible benefit in burning fat, you need to have healthy muscles, because that is a huge site. That's a major site of fat burning throughout your body. So let's take a little bit of a quick look here, what we're going to address in terms of the physiology. So we want to establish this kind of movement first mindset. Not everything that you are going to do needs to be purposeful, really intense exercise. And we want to just kind of get that right out in front. If you're not really into exercise, or you're new to exercise, you don't need to go crazy and jump into super intense exercise right away to get a lot of benefits. As I mentioned, muscle is your largest metabolically active organ. It accounts for about 45 to 55% of your total body weight. And you want to maintain that, grow that, and keep that as healthy and as active as long as you possibly can. And the best way to do that is to exercise often, but also we'll talk about this idea of unstructured physical activity. And that's going to be actually more or less the activities of daily living that you're usually doing, in trying to cut back on sedentary time. So after 40, just like we had kind of mentioned, you have that change in the neural connection with muscles, and the muscles that you are not using. And usually this tends to be these type 2 muscles, the muscles that are there to produce high strength activities, high power, high speed. Many folks, because of the headwinds and kind of the aches and pains, the joint issues associated with getting a little bit older, they may not exercise as often, or they may not be as willing to exercise. Those unused muscles are the ones that are not prioritized, and they will potentially, you lose that ability to activate them because of that denervation that we talked about. The way to combat that is to prioritize exercise, and we're going to just take a quick look at how you're going to do that. What's the structure within Zero that will help you to maintain this movement first mindset? The great thing about this is, again, exercise is something that fits for everybody, and movement works for, if you're super interested in exercise and you want to go very into the weeds and focus on a lot of the nuance, you can absolutely do that. If you want to, you're kind of more of a beginner, there's perfect things that you can start with as well, and you can make it super simple. So we're going to kind of be a little bit towards the simpler side for today, but if you have Q&A, or if you have some questions that you want to ask a little bit more specific, we can get into those as well. We may even have another Zero Live event that's very focused on exercise specifically. But for the purpose of today, first couple things you want to focus on, again, interrupting that sedentary behavior, breaking up that sedentary time, and prioritizing functional movement and balance. So we talked about, again, the denervation is super important to be aware of as you age. But in addition to that, in order to keep that denervation from happening, you just have to simply activate your muscles. And the best way to do that is to try to limit the amount of time that you're being sedentary throughout the day. There's been some really cool research. There was one study, it was a Mayo Clinic study in 2015, where they were looking at people that were sedentary and non-exercised, and they basically were able to figure out that if they were just doing yard work, for example, they were burning 100 to 150 kcals per hour versus TV was 9 kcals for an hour. Home maintenance, cleaning, if you spend some time cleaning in the evening, a couple hours, based on this study, they were showing that you were getting 500, 600 calorie benefit. And we know a lot of this information. This is called the non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT. I know Nicole has mentioned in a previous Zero Live. This unstructured movement makes up a majority of most people's total energy requirements in terms of their physical activity. Not everyone's going to train 2, 3, 4 hours every day, and that's perfectly fine. So make sure that you're interrupting that sedentary time. That's going to be crucial. Second thing is strength, especially after the age 40. You're going to want to try to strength train, shoot for 2 to 3 times a week. If you're only doing one strength training session a week, it may help you maintain, but it may not be quite adequate, and it certainly will be hard to grow or continue to build muscle with just one strength training session per week. Big thing here is to make sure that you're challenging yourself. You want to be somewhere in the 70 to 80% of failure. So, for example, if you plan to do a set of 10, let's call it squats, you don't need to fail at 10. Maybe you could have made it to 11 or 12 reps, but you stop at 10, you're about 80% fatigued. You're not trying to injure yourself. You want to make sure that you're able to keep consistency within your training. And you want to also try to potentially build peak strength. So for most people, they will get to their peak strength in age 20 to 30. Unfortunately, after that point in time, strength for the majority of people will begin to decline unless they are actively training. You can stretch that plateau out from 20 to 50 years old easily if you continually or you have a habit of exercising and strength training at least a couple times a week. So that's something to really be aware of. Especially after age 50, the decline in strength is about 4% per decade. And you can do something about that. You're not locked into that. You don't have to lose strength and you don't have to lose muscle mass at that kind of accelerated rate. If you are strength training a couple times a week, you can reduce that to about a 1%, maybe 2% decline and cut that reduction in half. Unfortunately, just based on time, based on natural aging processes, muscle and bone are not maintained throughout life at the peak level that you get to have at your earlier 20s or 30s, for example. Zone 2 exercise. This is light to moderate exercise. With Zero, we recommend that you do ideally at least 3 to 4 sessions a week of this. With Zone 2 in particular, this is something that we really key into because we're interested in fat burning. And Zone 2 is the perfect intensity where your body burns the peak amount of fat, so per unit time. So during Zone 2 exercise, whatever your max potential for burning fat per minute is, or per hour, depending on your exercise unit of time that you're interested in, this is going to be that absolute peak for you. Usually this is going to be 60 to 80% of your max heart rate. Depends on your training status. If you're very well trained, you might be able to be at that 80% max heart rate range. If you're not as actively trained or you're not necessarily a competitive athlete, you may be closer to that 60% age predicted max heart rate. So if you never calculated that, a nice easy way to do that would be take 220, subtract your age, and that will be your age predicted max heart rate, roundabout. It's not an exact perfect, but it gets you within about 10 or 12 beats of your max heart rate. The other thing that we like about Zone 2 is that it's important that it helps for metabolic health. So when you're doing Zone 2, especially if you're doing fasted Zone 2, you kind of get this double benefit and you kind of boost that fat burning even to another level. You're training your mitochondria to get better at burning fat. So that's one thing that Zone 2 is particularly good for. So we recommend trying to get, again, 3 to 4 sessions, about 20 minutes or longer per session. If you can build up to 4 or 5 sessions that are 45 minutes a piece per week, that would be wonderful. But as a good start point, try to get 20-minute sessions a couple times a week. That will be a great start point. Another, I guess, if you don't have like the lactate meter and all the fancy gadgets to figure out like where you are in terms of your heart rate intensity and some of that, the talk test is wonderful here. So with zone 2, again, it should be light to moderate exercise. You should be able to carry a conversation. For if you work remote, you should be able to potentially talk and have a meeting while you're kind of lightly cycling or walking at kind of a brisk pace. It shouldn't be this winded, I'm going to say a couple words and then I've got to like huff and puff and say a couple more. So in terms of gauging where your zone 2 is for you, the talk test or the singing test, whatever you'd like to use, is a good way to go about it. Finally, high intensity interval training or high intensity exercise. This is super important because it's something that you really can't replicate with just zone 2 exercise. Strength kind of helps a little bit, but one thing that is lost actually even quicker than strength or muscle mass is your ability to produce peak power. In fact, most adults by age 19 to 20 years old, they have reached their peak power output and it will begin falling, and it falls more rapidly than strength or muscle mass does. So one way to keep this sustained as long as possible and maybe even build power output is to do something where it's higher speed. There's a little bit higher injury risk here, so do build into this. Build up to doing the high intensity work gradually. That's kind of why we've kind of started with 1 and 2. Interrupt your sedentary time, do that unstructured activity, make your way down to strength and zone 2 exercise, which can be kind of interchanged, and then the high intensity interval training is something that you might want to wait a little bit until you kind of are at a certain point where your joints are going to be safe and you're going to be safe doing the exercise. Benefits of high intensity interval training are that you will actually improve your VO2 max, which is the number one predictor of all-cause mortality. So there's longevity benefit associated with the high intensity interval training. And it also kind of gives you this nice benefit. It's time efficient because it's a blend of strength and cardio kind of in the same unit, and you're operating at near maximal heart rates. So your exercise might be, I'm going to do 30 seconds on and I'm going to take 2 minutes off to rest, and 30 seconds on, and you might do a series of those intervals. So if you have questions about this, we have a wonderful article. Please, if you haven't already, download Zero. If you have Zero already, you can visit the article in app or you can visit our blog. The article is linked at the bottom of the slide. It's Your Guide to Healthy Movement. I did a Google test on it. So if you literally type into Google, Your Guide to Healthy Movement, Google will present it as one of the top articles for you. I'd like to
All right.
turn it over to Dr. P, if you want to give
Yeah, I
us a
just
little
want
bit
to
of an idea of sleep and energy, or if you have anything you want to add on, especially with, I know, the injury risk that you key into.
Yeah. No, I think the important thing to understand here is even if you exercise at the gym, let's say you're hardcore, you're doing your high intensity interval training, just remember if then you sit for 23 rest of the hours of the day and night, then you have to interrupt the sedentary time too. So these sort of layer on. So just remember, even if you're really doing a great job with the physical activity and you want to sort of prevent that progression, the default setting for aging, then you'll want to interrupt sedentary time. And that's why, a lot of these wearables will tell you to stand up every hour or move. So just a little tidbit there.
Yeah, there
All
was
right.
one, if you don't mind, sorry, I'll
Mhm.
add in one study that I thought was quite interesting. It was a study where they were doing more of a theoretical math calculation, but they were looking at an actual person sitting at a desk for 8 hours, for example, like many people do at work. Continuously, if you sit there for 8 hours, you might burn about 400 calories if you're kind of an average sized male or female. If you stand 15 minutes every hour while you're at that 8 hour workday, you can increase your calorie burn by about 200 calories. If you were to walk even just for 15 minutes an hour, you add another couple hundred calories. And if you were able to increase that, it's that same thing. Just every 15 minutes of every hour, try to do something, even if it's standing in place. You are going to kind of move yourself out of the sedentary bucket, and you are going to improve some of that muscle activation. There's postural benefit. You can stand on one leg. Dr. P and I were recently talking about it's called the so-called old man test. But basically, it's an interesting test of your balance. If you're interested in trying it at some point, you put your socks and shoes out in front of yourself, and then while balancing on one foot, you will pick up a sock, put it on your foot, pick up a shoe, put it on your foot, and try not to go onto 2 feet while you're doing that. If you're so inclined, that might be an interesting thing to do to test to see where your baseline's at for balance and coordination.
All right. So let's move forward to sleep and energy. This is sort of the last section right here. And we just want to talk about sleep and energy levels often change, and sleep patterns and efficiency are affected by circadian rhythm disruptions with changing hormones and so on. You can also tell that with sleep, if sleep is disrupted because of the hormones or because of pain from arthritis or because somebody has an enlarged prostate or has a urinary tract issue and they're going to the bathroom a lot in the middle of the night, it does disrupt sleep and it can impair your body's ability to have as robust an immune system. And the autophagy can be decreased. And autophagy is when your body is sort of recycling cells and breaking down the ones that should no longer be there. So, again, if sleep is not sufficient or it's disrupted too often, then it's also possible that cortisol, that stress hormone we talked about earlier, cannot de escalate. It can't come down a lot. So, what can we do about this? We have to understand that sleep is the cornerstone of recovery. So, as we get older, we need to make sure that we have recovery time. We know sleep deprivation can lead to dementia, increased risk of dementia in the future. We definitely don't want that to happen. So, sleep pattern and efficiency, got to master that. And there's different ways to do that. Recovery while you sleep is super important so that you can maintain all the benefits of all your lifestyle behaviors. And of course, it's going to help manage your cortisol levels. So, what can you do? So, to optimize sleep and restoration, it helps to sort of track. So, let's talk about number one, start fasting about 2 to 3 hours before your intended sleep time. The reason this is important is to give your gut some time to rest so that you can actually really rest instead of your guts doing work while you're trying to sleep. Also, have some consistent sleep hours. And even if you don't fall asleep, if you protect that time and it's regular, your body can then be ready to rest and it's prepared for the repair time. So it can plan ahead and sort of pace itself. If you have a pre sleep routine, then you're going to be able to train your body that there's a certain routine that means it's bedtime and it's going to be time for repair and rest. And we do this for our babies, but we often forget that for grown-ups, it's the same thing. And then again, tracking and learning. So, a lot of people will have wearables or ways that they're sort of self assessing. Do you feel tired when you wake up? Or was your sleep not restful? And in that case, you would want to figure out what's going on. So, if you've been tracking, you can start seeing patterns over time. And that can be very helpful so that you can optimize your sleep. And then finally, the restorative practices are going to be important whether or not you sleep. So these are things that help you sort of recharge and they break that stress cycle every day. So this is very personal. And Rich, you and I were talking about some of the different ways people do this, whether it's journaling and meditation or some of the activities like you're playing basketball or different ways that people find these restorative practices.
Yep,
Any
there's
thoughts here, Rich?
around the restorative practices, there's passive restoration, could be meditation or getting a massage, taking, I guess if you're familiar with yoga nidra or non-sleep deep rest, where it is kind of a form of meditation where you're not actually being physically active and you're able to rest both the mind and the body. Or yeah, for me, I'm a big fan of basketball. I play it with other folks that are maybe past their prime every so often, and I really enjoy it. At least mentally, it allows me to kind of check out, and I'm more maybe being physically um, busy, but I'm definitely relaxing and kind of de-stressing in that way. So sometimes you get a benefit of both. You can have benefit of you're getting a movement or exercise, and you're also getting your restoration, at least from from one area, your mind or your body.
Exactly. So now we've just kind of reviewed what works after 40, and we talked about metabolism and hormones, the body composition and weight, and sleep and energy. And the really fun part about this is fasting is foundational and it's so simple, right? So you don't have to get new equipment. Insulin sensitivity improves, your body weight can be managed or even lowered, preservation of lean mass, restoration time, and of course, it boosts energy levels. So, this is really such a foundational concept. So, let's just go over the summary actionable recap. Number one, default hormone changes after 40 can be optimized. Fasting and exercise are synergistic tools to optimize after 40. So, that combination. Healthy habits can reduce the risk of, limit, or reverse age related diseases. And we're talking about things like high blood pressure and diabetes and joint pains and sleep problems and so on. So here's how you do that. We talked about metabolism and hormones. Fasting for 12 to 18 hours lowers your insulin, turns on that fat burning. So simple. Quality diet and daily movement. Also important and synergistic. Reducing the time to fat burn. We talked about different nutrition habits, pre-fast meal, and fasted exercise. Rich talked about the body comp and weight and the healthy muscles that delays aging, decreasing sedentary time, super important, and increasing unstructured movement. He talked about balance, strength training, zone two, and high intensity interval training. And again, the strength training 2 to 3 times per week, and the zone two, 3 to 4 times per week if you were totally crushing it here. And then sleep and energy. So start with fasting 2 to 3 hours before bed to give your gut some rest also. Have consistent sleep hours, have a pre sleep routine, and you can do naps, meditative rest, or track. Basically, you're trying to track and learn what's going on. Restorative practices to break stress cycles. These will all be important as you continue to move forward. So now we're going to shift gears and we're going to shift into Q&A time.
All right. We had quite a few coming in while we were going through there. If you have questions, please drop them in the comments and we will make sure to get going with them. I saw one I wanted to see if you wanted to kick off with.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. First one, what about recommendations for people who work at night?
Such a good one. Shift work. Oh my gosh, I totally get it. Do you have any, Rich, that you wanted to start with?
Um, I know that you've worked with people specifically. You've got we've got patients and you've got people that you work with. That I'd be more interested. I'll try to fill in the gaps afterward if there's anything.
Okay.
So I defer to you first because I know that you are well versed in this area.
Well, so I do take care of a lot of people who have different shift work, whether they're physicians, pilots, people living in other parts of the world, and so on. So, one of the things that's really, really important about whatever shift you have is that you're going to have some kind of consistency because what you're doing is you're signaling to your body and you want to make sure that your body sort of can predict and prepare. So just like, if you know you have a vacation coming up or the weekends coming up or something like that and you're pacing yourself, and it might be a really hard time. You have that break coming up and so you can pace yourself well. And then if somebody says, "You know what? You're going to have to stay a half hour longer." You're like, "What? I wasn't pacing for that." So it's not that you couldn't do it. It's that it just adds an added stress. So anybody who has shift work, what you want to find are the sort of hours that are maybe consistent across time, and fasting works really well. So you might choose that these hours I know every day, whether it's my shift work day or my at home day, I can make sure I eat during these hours. And then the more uh, abnormal hours or the hours that change throughout the week, you might say, these are the hours that are my fasting hours. And that would really be helpful. And then making sure that you're giving yourself a relatively predictable routine before you go, for example, to bed or when you start fasting. Then your body knows, okay, this is it. This is the time to repair and recover. And then you'll do really well with that.
All right. Um, I'll add in the light, food, and movement are the three basically signals your body uses to set its internal clocks. So if you work kind of an adjusted schedule, night shift or graveyard shift, then try to, you're going to get food if you're managing fasting, like Dr. P just mentioned. Try to be active and try to also utilize light when you want to be most awake. If you're trying to shift your schedule away from the normal day night schedule or kind of flip it on its head, those are the things you want to do. So when you want to be most awake, try to be, exposed to bright lights as much as possible. When you want to sleep, and try to train your body to go against the normal day and natural light and dark cycle, then cue into that as much as possible. And if you can move more again during your active time at work or whatever you have for your schedule, that's the way to go.
Totally love it. All right. Let's now do a question from registration.
Yep.
Valerie asked, should women adjust their fasting protocol as we age? How can we be sure to get the correct nutrients needed to prevent osteoporosis and sarcopenia? Fabulous question. Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Um, I can start. So yeah, in terms of adjusting fasting protocol as you age, that's going to be a bit more individual. This actually ladders in, and maybe I'll just tuck it in here. It seems to make sense. In terms of one person related to this asked, when do you stop or when do you have to change your fasting, pause your fasting entirely because, your age is too high? We looked into the research there. The oldest people that have been in research studies with intermittent fasting, there was one study from 2016. The oldest individual in that study was 82, and the cohort was like 69 to 82 years old. There was another study in 2019 that had, again, it was kind of focused on people that are in late adulthood, went up to 87 years old. So in both of those studies, one was a 5-2 setup. So they were, fasting 2 days a week. But the other one was a daily 16-8, which was impressive to me to see that they were doing that. I would usually tell folks, especially as you age, in terms of adjusting your fasting protocol with women in particular, you might want to maybe be a little bit more conservative, move more towards that 12-hour range. That seems to be the easiest way to make sure your eating window is long enough to get the nutrients you need, to have the protein you need to prevent the sarcopenia, and then also be able to kind of prevent osteopenia, osteoporosis. But interested to see what Dr.
Yeah, so I think it's really, really important. So, first of all, osteoporosis means that your bone density is decreasing to the point where fractures are very easy. And then again, sarcopenia is when you're losing muscle and bone and you're basically becoming frail. So, both of those lead to increased hospitalizations, morbidity, and mortality, meaning the higher risk of more problems and death. So, the challenge there is to do fasting well. So as we age, you just have to be smarter about how you do things, right? Because you want to take care of your body, make sure it has what it needs. So you have to maintain adequate protein. And protein needs are a little bit higher as we get older. And you have to have protein that's a high quality so that your body can absorb it and actually use it. Secondly, you have to have strength training because even if you eat protein, if you don't do anything that causes your body to require muscle, it's not going to make muscle, right? And it's not going to maintain it. It's going to give it up because muscle takes a lot of energy to maintain. So your body's going to be like, you know what? She's not using it. Out it goes. Bone health. You got to have enough nutrients for bone health as well. And you have to move your body. If you do not move your body, and carry weight, you are not going to need a lot of bone strength. So your body will actually de escalate that bone rebuild, which it already would be doing automatically. So you want to like sort of protect against that. With bone health, this is where the calcium, the vitamin D, magnesium, vitamin K2 become important. Now, if you're taking calcium and vitamin D, you want to make sure you're getting K2 because that's going to make sure that the calcium goes to your bones and not to your blood vessels and heart. So that combination is super important. So just paying attention to that. You can also get adequate vitamin D with, easy supplements. Problem is vitamin D stores in the body. So there's a certain level you have to have And there's also, you want to make sure that you're testing your blood levels, because if you have a very low level of vitamin D, then you're going to need to give yourself a little bit more vitamin D replacement, and your body can start and replace it, but you don't need to overload, right? So it's not more is better with vitamin D. So those are super important. And then again, those are the things about nutrients to prevent osteoporosis and sarcopenia. But again, the most important thing is whatever you do, you have to also move. So it's not just the nutrients; it's also the physical activity. So that's such a fabulous question. All right,
Okay.
shall we pick another one?
Yeah. Maybe we'll pick a live question here.
Great.
Andrew has a question. Feels like it's a fine line between fasting and starvation. Am I wrong? That's a very good question.
It's a fabulous question. Rich, did you want to start with it?
Yeah. So there's some stark contrast between fasting and starvation. The biggest kind of overarching principle is that generally fasting, you're intentional about it. There is a purposeful start time. There's a purposeful end time. Starvation is different in the amount of time that it usually you're looking at multiple weeks to kind of classify as starvation. And there's not a very clear, I'm done here. I will refeed and get the nutrients I need. Um, so that's usually, fasting can be, there's studies where people are fasting multiple days, multiple weeks potentially. Some of the foundational knowledge that we got was from, they called them starvation studies, where they were fasting for multiple weeks, but there was a designated end time. And that's the biggest thing, I guess, that I see is you're intentional with fasting. And for zero members, people that, we encourage within zero, that you can get most of the benefits of fasting without maybe some of the risk associated with longer fasts. If you fast in the 12 to 18-hour range, that's why usually that's where we're encouraging people to invest their time. There's a time and place for 24 hours or longer. But in terms of chronic or, a daily habit of fasting, those shorter fasts, 12 to 18 hours, are miles away from starvation at that point.
So the other thing to understand is starvation and fasting have a different hormonal setup. So if you are panicked because you don't know when you're going to get your next meal and your body's cortisol level is sky high, okay, because you're stressed out, now you're actually melting down the tissues. Remember, we talked about that melts down your muscles and melts down your fat tissues. That is not what we're going for, right? So if you're fasting, you don't have that high cortisol level on top of that maladaptive, very high, chronically elevated cortisol level. So you actually maintain your muscle. It's kind of cool. So you prioritize burning fat. This is very different with starvation. You're going to just burn everything up, and that stress hormone doesn't settle down because you're still scared you're not going to get food. So that's a very, very different hormonal state of the body. But I love that question because that is exactly what, people will get confused. So very, very different. And if you're starving, you may not have access to appropriate food, even when you do get food after, right? You don't actually get to choose necessarily, depending on how people are doing it. But
There's even
all
a
right.
hydration concern as well in many starvation instances. So, yeah, we generally don't encourage any dry fasts. That is unnecessary. It's and so that's another added layer of stress on the body.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right. Next question.
Um, am I sourcing it, or would you like to pick one, Dr. P?
Oh, I can pick one. Sure. There's a great one here. Let's see. When it comes to exercise, can walking be enough? And if yes, how long and how often? Rich, this is right up your alley.
All right. Yeah. So when it comes to exercise, walking can be enough. It depends a little bit on what your goals are. It also depends on what your previous exercise experience level is. Um, Walking is absolutely wonderful. It's kind of fits right in, that um, interrupting sedentary time and doing functional movements. This is, something that is going to be kind of nearing that zone two. You're going to burn a ton of fat when you're walking. How long, how often? if, with a lot of this unstructured movement or this, kind of walking, activities of daily living, chores around the house, yard work, there's not really a set upper limit. It's kind of like if you have the time and you have the interest and you aren't in terrible pain and you want to be active, go for it. Absolutely go for it. In terms of kind of setting yourself a goal, again, try to, if you want to walk and that's going to be your mode of exercise. Try to shoot for at least 20 to 30 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week, would be a great kind of start point. If you can work up to 4 to 5 days a week where you're getting close to 45 or 60 minutes, that would be wonderful. You may notice that just walking alone gets you to a certain point. And if you want to go further than that, you either have to increase the intensity. You don't necessarily have to jog if you don't want to, but maybe it's time to consider like a weighted backpack, weighted vest, just to load the bones, load the muscles. And you don't have to get a ton of speed. You don't have to, maybe, some people can't run for orthopedic issues. Walking can be something that you can kind of modify to make it more difficult and add resistance so that it can kind of grow with you as your fitness increases.
Great. Yeah. I think it also matters how active you are naturally. So, walking alone, you would definitely want to do something with your upper body and your core as well. And you can do that with body weight, or you might just be very active. You like working in the garden, doing laundry, mopping, whatever. Okay. So then let's see. How about there's a lot of great questions that we got both from the registrations and here on women's hormones.
Mhm.
And we are actually going to have an expert specialist come and talk to us about that. So I want to just maybe I'll move forward and we'll go through some of the other slides
Okay.
and then do the member tips. And Rich, what do you think? There were so many questions we didn't get to answer. Should we stay after and do our after hours party where we
I'm
answer more questions?
I'm always a fan. After hours is
Okay.
there's a whole new energy in after hours. So
Okay.
I'm good to stay
So,
till
so
yeah.
anybody who has additional questions, you can stick around for after. We're just going to sort of honor the 1 hour that we've told everybody we'd give them, sort of these pearls of wisdom, and then afterwards we'll stick around and answer some more questions. So let's then next go to the zero members share their tips and tricks. So every time we share 10 tips that have been sent in the registration. So number one, eat your last meal at least 3 to 4 hours before bedtime and sleep at least 8 hours. Doing that and having water and black coffee when I wake up easily gets me to 16:8 fast. Ceylon cinnamon lowers blood sugar and tastes great brewed in black coffee. Did I pronounce that right? I'm not even sure, but drinking salted lime water, riding the hunger wave was number three. Number four, sauerkraut juice to manage hunger.
That's a new one for me. I've not seen that before.
That actually works really well with the ferment because then you get,
Mm.
some gut microbiome
Okay.
nourishment as
Probiotics.
well. Yeah, so good. All right, number five, walking daily helps. I exercise or drink water when I have trouble fasting. Number six, there's no trick. Intermittent fasting is a lifestyle. Number seven, hydration and being in nature. Number eight, never start with long hours. Ease your way into longer fasts, and that way you'll not give up as you will be seeing results. Number nine, I like to exercise in the morning about 10 hours into my fast. And number 10, put yourself around supportive people while fasting. Fabulous. So let's wrap up with a summary of the 5 key takeaways. Number one, hormones change after 40, and the default can lead to loss of muscle and bone, increased weight gain. Good news, you don't have to go down that path. Studies have shown that tracking really makes a difference in the outcomes. So your body's really designed to adapt and thrive. So basically, you want to signal appropriately, find a way to track it. One of the most powerful ways to reset your hormone cycling is number two, it's too fast and lower that insulin so you can burn fat. Studies demonstrate that this will lower BMI, waist circumference, blood sugars, and improve multiple other health risks. Number three, when you do eat, limit your sugar and alcohol. limit that insulin spike and the associated loss of access to fat cells as a fuel source. You're going to unload the liver, keep the sugars better controlled, remove the barriers to normal sleep architecture. You're going to protect the brain and increase the proportion of protein in your diet so that you can meet the needs to maintain skeletal muscle and bone and maintain your immune function and metabolism and your weight. So, multiple wonderful things. Number 4, limit that sedentary time and exercise to maintain or improve your muscle function. Load your muscles and do that aerobic exercise. And number 5, protect a regular sleep time as much as possible. If you're not able to sleep, use the time for your personal restorative practices to break the stress cycles. You can do all sorts of different things, and that's going to be a personal choice.
Wonderful.
Now, let's go to the upcoming live events. So a lot of people have been writing in some fabulous questions, and we really want to answer and dive deep into many of these areas. So you asked and we deliver. So Monday, May 6th, 2024, we have Dr. Scanlon. She's going to come. She's an OB-GYN, and she is an expert in women's hormones and health. And so she does hormone replacement sort of on a regular basis. She's been doing it forever. She's an expert in that area, and we're going to have her come and have a conversation with us. On Monday, May 13th, we will get the inside scoop from our very own principal product engineer, Jordan, who will show us how to burn fat faster with zero. And the cool thing about this is it's going to be a way that we can learn how to use zero from that design perspective. And you'll also maybe get some hints of what might be coming down the road. And then finally, our third Monday in May, on May 20th, you'll get to meet with the ER physician, Dr. Shaw. She led the COVID response at Rush in Chicago. And she also did that while she was a mom and a wife and obviously a physician. And so she's going to talk about how she manages stress, success, and metabolic health. So we'll have her on May 20th. And so bring your questions and your curiosity because they'll have a lot of really good things to share with us. Now, you can also join Zero Live Friends. Tap into the power of our Zero community and learn from and continue to share your best tips with the Zero community. You can motivate and inspire others by posting your progress by tagging at Zero Longevity #StartAtZero and become a Zero Live regular. Invite your friends to join the fun. And again, we're going to be sending out recordings of this presentation so that you can pull whatever pieces you liked. And if you share it with your friends, then you'll be able to talk about and even do challenges together. So it's a great way to sort of educate together. So what else do we have? So remember with Zero, we've got resources and support, and they're just a tap away. You can review the science, message our support team, who are awesome. And you can email that support team at zerolongevity.com. And follow us on social at Zero Longevity. And remember, when you track with Zero, you can use your data to figure out how to get into fat burning faster. And so you will get better and better at doing this, whatever age you're at. And that's the whole point. We want to use all the data that we've collected. This is science-based, and the tools are there for you to really tap into and get the answers you need. Tell your friends, look up for that next email that's going to come with all these links and so on. Now, again, recording will be available on YouTube, and we're going to share the link to everybody via email, and you can share it with your friends as well. And I think, Rich, you and I are going to stick around and answer some more questions. Is that right? For anybody
I
who wants to stick
was
around?
I was scrolling through and there was a lot of good ones. So
Oh,
I'd like
good,
to
good,
knock
good.
out as many as we can here.
Okay, let's do it.
I feel bad when we leave a lot of questions hanging. So
Totally, totally. Okay,
wonderful. If you're ready, I'm just gonna start firing.
sounds good.
Okay.
Let's see.
First one. Let's see. What about? Man, there's a lot of good ones. There's some
I
on
know.
VO2 max. I'd like to cover one on. We haven't talked about a lot of nutrition. I saw a bunch of them on nutrition. There was one here. I'll make sure I show it. Can ketogenic diet, no sugars, no carbs, imitate or replace fasting? Cheers. a very pleasant
Great
question.
question. Did you want to start with that?
Happy to, yeah.
Okay.
There, so I'll try to go quickly, but the keto basically, like fasting was, it used to be the treatment for epilepsy. It used to be the treatment for diabetes. Before insulin was available that you could get, through your physician, fasting was a treatment for that. Keto was kind of an evolution where if you wanted to maintain calorie intake, but you wanted to kind of get some of the benefits of fasting in terms of the fat burning and the the ketones being elevated in your bloodstream, you could do keto. So there are lots of overlap between ketogenic diet and fasting. There are definitely some contrasts, though. So it depends on what your goal is. A lot of people find that if they are fasting, and I did quite a bit of keto research for a time when I was at Ohio State. A lot of people that we enrolled for ketogenic studies found that they were doing a lot of intermittent fasting just because they were, there was a lot of satiety going on because they were kind of clicked into this fat burning mode through their nutrition. Even if they weren't fasting on purpose, they kind of just, they were satiated. So they, found themselves kind of in this 16-8 and keto kind of happening all at the same time pretty often. Um, Enough so that we started like kind of just dedicating like here's going to be an intermittent fasting group, here's going to be a keto group, and we're trying to separate the two. But there is a lot of overlap. I guess, is there anything you had specifically in terms of notes that would be uh, pertinent to?
Yeah. So, ketogenic diet is the purpose of that is to boost ketones. So, to get high ketones, you have to be burning fat. So, that is for sure. Intermittent fasting, you can get into a ketogenic state. Absolutely, where you're burning fat, and the longer you fast, the more ketogenic your blood numbers will go. So there are some overlap, but the purpose might be different because if you're not necessarily going to stay in keto, meaning continuing to keep those carbs very low, you might then have fluctuations of your blood sugars that can be pretty dramatic. And so it depends on how consistent you want to be, but ketogenic diets are very therapeutically beneficial for many people. And some people just say, that's just easier for me. I love that kind of diet. And that works very well. Other individuals find it's a little bit more challenging and they have a lot of deviations. And then it takes time to get back into that ketogenic state. So they might choose intermittent fasting. But again, both of them have therapeutic benefits and they can be used. It's based on the person. So that's when it really helps to talk to somebody who's an expert in those areas that can help you decide what's best for you. And you can actually change it up. So you can do a little bit of this and a little bit of that over time. So you might have a few months that you're doing keto, and then you might say, okay, now, holidays, I'm not going to be keto, whatever. So you just want to do it safely. You just don't want to end up in the worst diet, which is integrating keto, which is low carbs, high fat, and then adding in a little bit of carbs. So now you're moderate carbs, high fat. That's the worst combo, right?
Yeah,
So as long as you don't do that, you should be okay either way.
yeah, you got to
So
kind of pick one or the other. You're going to
yeah,
emphasize fat burning, and that's your nutrition setup, or you're going to be more of, kind of the default is more of a carb
yeah.
based burning system. Intermittent fasting is nice because you cycle in and out of both. You're burning a little bit more carbs more than likely when you're in your eating window, and you're burning a bunch more fat when you're in your, when you're during your fasting window. So, awesome.
I
Um,
really like this question I want to answer here. And this is about what movements are best for knee replacement surgery patients. This actually also applies to not just knee surgery patients, but a lot of surgical patients and knee as well, because that changes your mobility patterns. But this speaks to what Rich was showing earlier about sort of leveling up. And obviously, after knee replacement surgery, you're going to have physical therapy and they're going to help sort of rebuild. And they start with making sure you get out of bed the day of the surgery, right? Pretty much everybody that, you're pulled out of bed. And then you have to start moving and slowly you're building up your ability to have balance and that flexibility so that it doesn't become too stiff, right? You have to have range of motion. And then you're going to start building up strength. So it sort of builds and layers. There we go. Exactly. So you're going to essentially be working your way up. And so that's a really great question. And if you don't move it, you're going to lose it, right? So you want to be able to achieve, the ability to move more comfortably. Presumably, that's part of what a knee replacement surgery is about, unless it was a traumatic injury. So,
I
okay.
think there was like a part two to that. It might be best zone two exercise, total knee replacement. So um, using a cellar sizer. Myself, I'm unfamiliar with the cellar sizer. Do you know what a cellar sizer is, Dr. P? And if not, that's okay. I'm gonna.
Yeah, so the best zone two exercises with total knee replacement, I think it depends on how far along you are after the knee replacement, right? So it might start out with bicycle and just getting that range of motion and also activating your heart. That might be the first place that you start. Some people start in a pool, and so they might just be walking across the pool because they can't necessarily wait, but they can't hold up their own weight exactly well yet. So there, different people have different plans based on the available resources. So I think that's a really good question.
Yep. Yeah, I know. With knee replacements, I think flight phases are out. So anything running, jumping seems to be kind of like that's not in the
Not
cards
yet.
anymore. So yeah, just like Dr. P said, unloaded cycles are a great option. Um, as you kind of progress, maybe you go cycle to more of a pool setup where you still have some weight there, but it's dampened by the water. Possibly a rowing ergometer as you move forward, walking. And then if you want to get into like the weighted walking and stuff, but it's going to again follow your trajectory and your recovery.
Yeah. And there's several questions here about high intensity interval training.
Okay.
Catherine says, doesn't hit lead to, whoops, where did it go? Okay, doesn't hit lead to increased cortisol, and those make it harder to burn fat.
Um, so HIT is the stress on the body. So she's not necessarily wrong. That would cause an increase in cortisol. But almost any exercise, if it's gonna get your metabolic rate and your heart rate up, it just so happens that HIT is kind of up near that upper end. So you get a bit more of a stress response from that. But it's usually HIT. You're also going to have smaller windows of exercise. You're not exercising for hours and hours on end. So you can actually, believe it or not, even with like the continuous kind of light moderate exercise, if you overdo the volume on that and you're not allowing recovery and you're not following up with nutrition, your cortisol can go pretty high with that exercise as well. So with HIT, there is a cortisol spike. You kind of want that. You want the stress response that kind of signals to the body like, hey, we've got to invest some energy here. Let's rebuild, recover the muscle, make it stronger for next time. And as a result, it's not a problem. The problem, I guess, sometimes comes in if you're doing HIT too frequently. If you're doing, you know, intense HIT workouts 6-7 days a week, and you're also stressed at work, and you're also intermittent fasting, and you're just layering too much stress on top of stress. Um, that's when it's no longer a nice punctuated cortisol spike that helps you improve and adapt. It's now like a chronic layered stress cake that you're just getting overwhelmed with all day.
Yeah, and actually, the key point here is cortisol itself is not bad. Humans are designed to withstand tremendous stress. And we see that in lots of traumatic ways as well, right? When people have to endure something that is really just not okay. But high stress, you can handle that if you have recovery. Again, the recovery is the key. So, high intensity interval training, there's an end to that. And presumably, you allow that recovery. Again, as Rich said, if you don't give the recovery, then it's not good, right?
Mhm.
So that is the main point is recover after, and then that cortisol can come back down. So now you're cycling instead of keeping that cortisol super high.
Yeah.
Super
It's
important. Great question.
healthy for the muscle too, which will not make it harder to burn fat. It's because you're making the muscle healthier and because you're working the muscle, it will be more effective at burning fat afterward. So during the exercise, you're on the right track. You will burn more carbs, less fat during high intensity exercise than you would in light, moderate, zone two style exercise. Just during the exercise. After the exercise, you've kind of it's a whole different thing. You've stimulated the muscle, and you're going to get health benefits and the metabolic flexibility to burn more fat subsequently.
Great. So we have another question. How bad is the disruption if intermittent fasting or the consistent sleep time is skipped on an occasional weekend? Not bad.
No, this is very common.
Yeah,
This
this
is
is one of the benefits of intermittent fasting,
and
right?
yeah, and I'm not trying to keto is great. However, the thing that sometimes is hard with keto is if you're in and out of keto and you're, 5 days you're keto because it's the work week, and then on the weekend you're less keto, and you kind of have that transition that you're like, because sometimes keto requires a transition of a week, 2 weeks. Yeah, with intermittent fasting, this is pretty common. You almost, instead of a 5-2 where you fast 2 days a week, maybe you fast more intensely, or you're doing like 16/8 5 days a week. But on the weekends, you're doing more like a 12 or 13 circadian style fast where it's a bit shorter. That's quite common, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and this is actually okay. The body is again designed to adapt. And so you're training your body. And the most important thing is if you have a deviation long enough or sufficient enough that you notice massive weight gain, over the next few days, or you're now craving foods that you normally wouldn't, you might then rein that in. And have to spend a little bit more focused energy for a few days to get back in the groove. But your body can do it and it's absolutely fine. So, same thing with sleep. If you have disrupted sleep periodically, and many of us do, whether you want to or not, whether it's intentional or not, and your body's resilient, so it's able to handle that. But that is such a wonderful question because I often get in my clinic the question, well, it's really hard for me to be consistent. I'm not 100%. And I have yet to have a single human come into my office who has been 100% consistent with anything for 100% of the time forever, right? Life happens. So that's okay. We're designed to do that. And you can be wildly successful despite it. So super fun. Um, all right. And we
Ooh,
have a bunch of questions about does it break my fast? And we've got a lot of great content that we can send links to on like how you can identify those things. So butter in the coffee, depending what the purpose of the fast is. If you're doing a ketogenic diet and trying to stay in ketosis, that would be okay. But if you are actually trying to give your gut rest, obviously, if you put something in it like that, it's like butter. It's not. If you're just trying to keep insulin low, that would not be so much of a problem, right? So again, it
mhm.
depends on the purpose. If you're trying to do a complete fast, then it would break the fast. If on the other hand, you are just trying to keep the insulin low, that's still going to be okay.
This was a good one.
Hmm.
Any tips for socializing and fasting and mitigating any carbs or sugars had?
Fabulous question.
I like
You
the
want to
real life
start?
questions.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, tips for socializing and fasting. My number one tip is you don't have to be so rigid with your fasts. So, um, you can, adapt your fasting schedule. You can, shift your start time, or you can just not fast if you want for a day or two, based on your social interests, preferences, obligations that you might have. Um, in terms of mitigating any carbs or sugar had, uh, that would be. I mean, the carbs and sugar certainly cause you to delay your transition into fat burning while you're fasting, but theoretically, you wouldn't be having them in your fasting window. So I guess I'm a little unclear on, maybe I'm
Well,
missing
so
the
I,
point.
I get this. So again, thinking of that candle analogy. So if you've
Mhm.
had carbs and sugars and your insulin spikes up, you're building up your candle again, right? And so how do you start turning that back around? Just it might mean
Ah,
a little bit more fasting or being a little bit more diligent with avoiding some of the sugars and alcohols for several days after, so you can sort of bring that back down again. Fasting works really well in this space.
mhm.
Socializing, I tend to, it depends on how much you're socializing. So if you have certain days of the week that looking ahead, oh, these days I'm going out or I've got events and I'm going to be eating differently, those might be days that you do some intermittent fasting so that when you do go out, that's that might be the time that you're having more of your food options. Or you might choose that's a day that you don't fast, like Rich said. So I think there's different ways you can do this, but I welcome the social aspect. It's really good to have the social interactions because that does boost what we call oxytocin, which reduces cortisol. It's a good antidote to that.
Yeah, if mitigating any carbs or sugar, there's things that you can do, like fasted exercise might be the first thing I'd click into if I knew that I've done this before myself. I've got a few kids, they have friends, they have birthdays, they have stuff going on. If I had more cake or I was at a social event and I want to maybe do something about that afterward, I will often, do my best to prioritize protein alongside with the sugar or the things that are maybe the splurge calories I shouldn't be eating or the sugars. And then fasted exercise the next day. I just make sure to prioritize that, go for a walk before I break my fast or do something like that. That tends to be my go to strategy.
Yeah. And Peter Aarons has a question. Is it possible to know if I'm insulin resistant without a blood test? And how effective is fasting to reverse insulin resistance? Love this question. All right, Peter. So, yes, you can know if you're insulin resistant without a blood test. If your waistline is increasing, you are insulin resistant. So that's pretty much the beginning of insulin resistance. If you start having discoloration on the back of your neck or in your skin folds, or you develop a lot of skin tags around your neck and in your armpits, you likely have insulin resistance as well. So those are some really good ways that you can kind of assess if you have insulin resistance without a blood test. Also, if you get a cholesterol panel checked and you divide your triglycerides by your HDL, you can then also get a guesstimate that you may or may not have insulin resistance if the number is greater than 2 on average. It could be even 1.75, but definitely over 2, there's an 80% chance that you have insulin resistance if that's the case. And how effective is fasting to reverse insulin resistance? I'll tell you in my practice, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. I learned in med school that, once you sort of head down this metabolic pathway and you start with the insulin resistance slash prediabetes and then the diabetes, that it's a one-way street and you can't reverse that. And what we've learned is actually you can. So patients have taught me and made me a believer. And I think this is one of the things that is really cool to see. The human body can get it together and make it work. So even if it looks like it doesn't. And so I want to answer, there was another question about insulin resistance. Lucy asked the question, what to do if my body has built insulin resistance. Again, this is if you already know you have insulin resistance. So your fasting blood insulin level might be plasma insulin level is high. If you are having triglyceride to HDL ratios that are high, if you have prediabetes or diabetes, those would be reasons. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, right? Those are all associated with insulin resistance. If that's the case, you can reverse that in multiple different ways. And so, number one would be to move your body. So, something like going for a walk, getting in a pool. That will be very helpful because now you're building your muscle. Your muscle becomes a sink for the extra sugars. So, your insulin doesn't have to store everything into fat cells. Fasting is the number one most powerful way to turn this around. So, again, fast smartly, meaning fast appropriately, stay hydrated, and then when you eat, make sure you get your protein. And again, you have to be moving or your body doesn't know what to do with the protein, right? So you want to give your body the signal that you want to maintain muscle. So that's super important. And then there's medications as well. So of course, those are options and your doctor can talk to you about that. But those don't tend to reverse insulin resistant permanently. They might temporarily kind of put a band-aid on it. Fasting can actually turn that around completely.
All right. Ooh, this was a good one. It's how to address plateauing.
Oh,
It's a
such a
very
good
common question.
one. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to lead off on this one? I've heard you speak on this particular question a few times, and it's always glorious.
Well, so first of all, plateauing, so many ways to talk about this. Plateauing is really frustrating. It's like you're putting in the effort and then your weight just stops budging. And there can be many reasons for this. So, number one, it could be absolutely normal. That's the most disappointing one, right? Because it's like, oh, okay. So, but it doesn't mean you're stopped there. So, everybody has, when they're losing weight, they will have almost like a stepladder drop in their weight. It's not a 1 to 1.5 pounds of, fat mass loss per week. The body doesn't work that way. It pauses roughly about every 10 to 15 pounds. And what it's doing is it's sort of resetting its physiology and making sure this weight loss is appropriate, right? Because it's going to try to prevent you from losing too much weight. So that's a really important thing. Second thing is, it might be that there's other things that are interfering with your ability to continue to lose weight. And that could be medications, it could be disrupted sleep, it could be having your insulin spike up because of maybe something you're eating or drinking, or having excessive stress where your cortisol level stays high, not just goes up, but it stays high, or that you have a dramatic change in the level of physical activity. So some people will have an injury or they'll get sick, and then they were working out regularly or walking, and suddenly they're not doing that anymore. So there can be a lot of different reasons. But just remember, if you are getting that insulin down at least some of the day, and you are doing your best to get some rest, and you are moving your body will trend back down again, and that fat burning will continue, and you will continue to reorganize, where you start losing weight again. So, how can you do that? You're going to dial in, right? So, you got to self assess. And this is where we really like the data based approach, using your tracking and using your numbers. You can start seeing, okay, this is how much energy I have to spend exercising, or this is how much fasting I need to get into a fat burn state faster or to change things up. And sometimes it's just changing up what you're doing because your body adapts. So if you were doing the same 16/8 for a period of time and that stops working for you, and you're doing everything else, and time goes on and you're still not moving the needle, then you might say, okay, I'm going to change it up. I'm going to try maybe a different fasting pattern. And again, if you use your app, you can try using your data to figure out which fasting patterns you might want to try next. And then you'll have like a whole bunch of tools in your toolbox. So based on your data.
All right. Very wonderful. Yeah, that was um, change is certainly the antidote to plateauing. There may be a variety of changes you make. Taking a break is a great one. I know that there's been some really cool research recently. Um, Intermittent dieting is what the term is in the research world, where if you've been losing weight, it's certainly not linear. So if you find yourself on a plateau, or you're kind of at that stair step and it's stretching out a couple weeks, or 2 or 3 weeks, and you're kind of getting frustrated, um, you can take a break. You can add more calories. I'm not sure if you're tracking calories. I usually don't advise tracking calories. If you have that kind of time and you want to invest it somewhere, there's probably better places to invest it than all the tedious and monotonous effort that goes into tracking each calorie that you consume. But you can dial back your fast. That will usually cause you to increase your calories that you consume during your eating window if you fast for less hours. Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways you can tweak your exercise as well. If you've been doing the same exercise for a while, maybe it's time to I know Dr. P mentioned, I think it was last time we were last year alive, that she had started a new exercise program. There's like a level of excitement that comes with starting something new. Change something, or change a couple different things. Sometimes it's kind of just tweaking what you have going on. You've just been a little bit consistent, which is good, but sometimes your body learns the consistency.
And Edward had a question. Is it okay to take multiple food supplements and MCT oils during a 3 to 4 days of fasting?
It certainly can be okay. It kind of depends on what the food supplements are. The MCT oil will more than likely boost your ketone levels during your fast, but it does contain calories. It should not spike your insulin. So depending on what you're fasting for,
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
it'll determine what's okay, what's not okay. If you're fasting for 3 or 4 days, it's fairly common that someone that's interested in like a autophagy or a longevity benefit associated with their fast might fast 24, 48, 72 hours, kind of get into those multi-day fasts. Around 3 days is pretty common. If that's really your goal and you're looking to maximize your autophagy levels, then supplements, MCT oils might be counterproductive to that, because the MCT has energy. It's going to kind of tell your body there's energy available. You don't need to do your cellular recycling process. So definitely depends on what the fast
The
objective
purpose of the
is.
fast. And
Yeah.
also some supplements are not most supplements are not regulated. So again, it's a safety issue also, just knowing where you're getting your supplements. So but yeah. There was a question by Leon. Does blood sugar level out with extended fasting, say longer than 3 days? I'm pretty lean and my blood sugar gets down to 60 milligrams, assuming per deciliter, but I feel fine. I haven't gone longer than 3 days. So, blood sugar, your body is going to do everything it can to maintain blood sugar. And so, um, you know, presumably you're basically breaking down fat and all of your glycogen stores to maintain your um, blood sugar levels. And protein is not the one that's prioritized, actually, believe it or not. So a lot of people mistakenly think they're losing protein when they're fasting for longer. That's actually not the case. It's a protein sparing effect, which is pretty interesting because the body wants to protect you and it wants to keep the muscle as much as possible. So as long as you're feeling energetic and active, you should be okay. Sugars do tend to run a little bit lower if somebody is used to extended fasting. If it dropped that low and you were not regularly fasting or you're taking medications to lower your blood sugars, that is too low. So absolutely not okay. And so you would then be feeling pretty awful. So, and that comes to another question that I saw from Jennifer. How do you avoid anxiety when you start fasting? I found that when I've started fasting by about hour 4 or 5, I get anxious about not being able to eat. It's very frustrating. So this is actually quite a common concern that comes up in my office, and so I want to address this because I think we can really shed a lot of light here. So we talked about what happens when you have certain kinds of foods, or if your blood sugars go up, your insulin then spikes. Now, if you do this regularly, or you have some insulin resistance, and we all start developing that as we get older, your insulin might have overshot. Okay. So if your insulin goes super high, but you don't have enough blood sugar to manage that insulin that your body just pumped out, your body is then going to run out of fuel in the bloodstream, right? So the blood sugars start coming down too fast. And so it starts making people feel anxious. So it's actually an evolutionary drive. It's not a bad thing. It's like telling you, oh, we see the sugars are trending down. We're not sure if this is a good thing or not. So we just want to make you aware of it. And so it's a trained behavior of the body. It's not an intention, like it's not a bad thing. But if you understand, oh, this is just my body's getting a little anxious, but I'm okay. I'm going to drink some fluids. I'm going to be all right. And maybe if this is very hard to get to 5 hours, maybe 5 hours is the first fast, right? And then you're going to move it up to 6 hours after a week. And then maybe you can get to 7 hours. But if you know in your brain, you're not going to starve to death from having a 12-hour fast. That's just not going to happen, right? So if you aim to work up to that, you'll be okay. And you can have compassion about your body trying to protect you and being worried that you're running out of fuel, but you will not run out of fuel. You have fuel on the body. So, your body will turn to the fat cells and start burning that. And then once your body gets used to burning fat, it no longer develops anxiety because it has the enzymes to be able to do that. And so now your body's like, oh, I'm a fat burning machine. I see. We're just turning that on. And so then it just gets easier,
Mhm.
right? So you'll find it gets easier over time. But that beginning part, many people experience that anxiety, and that's so normal because the body's just making sure that you're going to be okay. And of course you are, because you've been designed to be able to burn fat cells as well. Your body just might be out of the habit of doing that.
Well, awesome. I had an interesting one, or at least I found it quite interesting. How quickly can muscle be
Hmm.
rebuilt? Um,
Hmm.
I think the next part means 71-year-old female. That might be a
Yeah.
shorthand.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, and the muscle cells in general, they don't know gender. Muscle cells don't know gender or age necessarily. There are changes in the muscle cell that happen with age, but the muscle doesn't know. So if you stimulate a muscle, and they've done studies where like you can actually excise a muscle from different age animals or different age humans potentially, and then stimulate them. The contraction speed and force, usually in species, if it's a mouse, it has a certain speed and length that it will do that. If it's a human, same thing. But in terms of rebuilding muscle, If you've not been training much and you're new to exercise, the first 8 to 12 weeks, you're actually going to have more of that neuromuscular junction will kind of reform. You'll reinitiate. I know I talked a little bit about denervation as part of the aging process. You may not actually see like the hypertrophy, the growth of the muscle cell, even if you start exercising immediately. And you may have to wait, to see the muscles grow and actually see more muscle mass 8 to 12 weeks, because in that 8 to 12 weeks, you will have, if you want, you could probably describe it as an explosion of, neuromuscular activity within the muscle. And usually, if you, for example, haven't been training much, you'll find that you have rapid strength increases, because as those nerves reconnect with those muscle cells and they begin to fire, you'll be able to add weight pretty quickly. After that point, after 8 to 12 weeks, you may find that the muscle cells grow. In terms of like putting on lean mass, a good target, kind of something, this is like if everything's going really well, maybe about half a pound per week, lean mass growth or development over time. But it usually, like, that's if everything's going quite well. So if it's, a little less than that, if it's a little slower than that, nothing to be concerned about. It is incredibly hard. You have to put a lot of effort in. You've got to have a bit of a calorie surplus. You have to have the protein to complement the exercise to be able to rebuild muscle if you have potentially atrophy, or sometimes if you've had an injury and you're in a cast or you're immobilized, you have atrophy there, you can rebuild it. But it will take some time. Muscle is it's just hard to build. It's very valuable. It's hard to build. You got to invest the time to do it. um, oh, I hear you now.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know what was going on there. Okay. Quick fire questions. Will uric acid go down eventually if I lower my A1C to normal and reduce the BMI to normal? Don't want to take allopurinol as suggested by my doctor. Absolutely. So uric acid can come down based on dietary changes and changing the weight. Uric acid, often is a byproduct of excessive fructose metabolism or a high stress state with a lot of glucose. It can also be from having, for example, too much alcohol and other things as well. But it's usually a fructose overload. And so you can really make a big difference there. And if you had fatty liver, that would also get better as well, just by reducing that. Intermittent fasting works really well for that as well. And then, is it okay to eat only one meal a day after fasting? Um, if you get adequate protein, yes. If you don't get adequate protein, no. And it depends on how often you're doing this, and other health factors also, depending on medications. Rich, did you have a quick answer on that one?
um,
Or
One meal a
Bruce?
day, yeah, I usually say occasionally. One meal a day is a good occasional strategy. Some
Hmm.
folks really enjoy it, and if that's you and you're having, you have energy levels in check and you're getting your nutrients that you need in terms of protein and fiber, like your nutrition's well rounded in that one meal, that's quite challenging to do. But if you can do that and sustain that, that's perfectly good. But usually, yeah, one meal a day, I kind of see it as, it actually takes us back to like that socializing. Maybe you kind of splurge, have the sugar and the carbs. Maybe you're going to do an OMAD day after that as kind of like a recovery tool to kind of check back into fat burning. Kind of, you went way over on the glucose burning side of the house, bring yourself back over to the fat burning side of the house, kind of, activate an OMAD in that case. But it is okay. You have to be very careful because you have a very small eating window. So you have to be, there's not a lot of room for error. Let me think, couple more.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the ones who are probably still sticking around here. So making sure we honor those. How realistic is BMR, which is estimated by a smart scale? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So at one point, I taught a nutrition class back in the day, and we looked at a lot of apps that calculate, estimate BMR. We looked at scales as well. It seems like there's a lot of variance amongst the different apps and scales, but usually they are within 200 to 300 calories based on what like a Harris Benedict or what like an equation estimation would be. Um, it may be a bit further from an actual measurement if you went into the lab to actually have it measured. But
Yeah,
yeah,
totally agree. Especially because the smart scales are usually bioimpedance, which aren't 100%, you know, figuring out your body comp. So,
yeah, subject to hydration
um,
a lot.
yeah, yeah, totally. Exactly. Exactly. And humidity in the air, it turns out as well. Um, all right. And then I measure ketones in my breath, but don't see it in my urine. Even after 40 hours of fasting, is something wrong? Well, I'm not sure if something is wrong, but if you see it in your breath and you don't see it in your urine, it's so breath monitors may or may not be as accurate as a blood monitor, a blood check for ketones. Urine, after a while, if your body gets used to being in a ketogenic state or having ketones, your urine will no longer show the ketones because you're actually using them, the urine ketones. That's why after about 4 weeks or so, measuring urine ketones is not as helpful because it looks like you don't make any ketones, but it might be that you're just using them. So
Yeah,
not as helpful.
I second that. We usually would use the capillary, like the little finger stick devices, to measure ketones because they seem to be the most accurate.
Okay. See any others?
Um, there was one I think that I was trying to get, like you were looking at the more recent ones.
Hmm.
How to not lose muscle
Mm.
during fasts, especially prolonged ones.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
yeah. So, number one is going to be while you're fasting, try to be as active as possible. I think we've definitely mentioned that a few times. Does not have to be the most strenuous exercise during your prolonged fast. Um, you're going to want to do something. Make sure that you're signaling during your fast, this muscle is valuable. We don't need to, potentially be burning this up or doing, catabolizing this. I know that the body has its way of preserving lean mass, especially while fasting. Um, and then in addition to that, a lot of what you're going to want to do is in your refeed, make sure your refeed is well set up. Make sure you're getting enough protein during your refeed. And those are the two major things. Make sure you're moving during your fast, even if it's light or moderate, kind of not the real strenuous stuff during your fast if you're kind of feeling a little less energetic. And then during your refeed, really prioritize the protein and make sure that you're, hitting your 1 gram per pound approximately, or, getting something sufficient so your body can get right back into the swing of things.
The studies are pretty consistent. Fasting is not going to cause you to lose much muscle mass. You might lose a little bit of water just because you're not a sponge anymore. So you basically will do very, very well with regards to maintaining your muscle mass as long as you're active. So the key here is active. So muscle is about activity. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So if you think you're fasting and you're also not moving, then you definitely will lose muscle because of the not moving, not because of the fasting. So fasting actually sets you up to maintain muscle more likely because of the way the hormone setup goes. But that should be our last question. What do you think? Everyone's been so generous with their time. It's been so fun.
Yeah, I would agree. There was one topic about NAFLD, which I think that might be an interesting one to consider for a future webinar. Intermittent fasting
Oh
has shown
yeah.
a ton of positive recent research on non-alcohol fatty liver disease. So I think that was Bruce who sent that in. Bruce, maybe we'll have to find some author, some researcher specifically, or maybe we'll just dedicate a whole Zero Live to that in the future because that's a very good question.
Totally. So keep bringing these questions. And again, we're inviting guests to be able to answer the kinds of questions that are coming in. So just remember, join us for the upcoming Zero Live dates. Our next one will be May 6th. So see y'all there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.